Hey guys, I am really excited to start this new writing unit where we are going to become authors of realistic fiction books. You had a chance before this lesson to listen to some mentor texts, Alexander and the No Good, Terrible, Very Bad Day, which was all about a boy who just had a really rotten day. Definitely something that has happened to me. I'm sure it's something like that's happened to you. And then also Enemy Pie, which is one of my other favorite stories about a little boy who has an enemy and has to find a way to solve that problem. Um, Realistic fiction is all about pretending. You get to make up the character, you get to make up where the story takes place. But the realistic part is really important because everything that happens in the stories that we will write are going to be things that could happen in real life. Now, if I'm thinking about my absolute favorite realistic fiction book, it's actually a series book, and I bet you know what it is. Do you know what it is? Are you thinking Junie B. Jones? Because if you are, you're right. Junie B. Jones is such a stinker, and she just gets into so much trouble. And every book is all about a different situation that Junie B has to kind of go through the first day of kindergarten and on and on and on. So if you ever are in need of a mentor text to look at while you are developing your characters and the different stories where they get into trouble, you can look to Junie B. So today's lesson, Mrs. Bird's going to talk you through how I might get started developing a realistic fiction book. So step one to starting this process is to think of a pretend character. You're going to want to give your character a name, and you're going to want to think about where your story is taking place. And then my favorite part, which is imagining the trouble that your character gets into, because these are going to end up being the problems in the stories that you will write about your character. So I was thinking of a character who is made up, but she reminds me a little bit of myself. So I'm using some of my schema, and you might end up thinking about your life as kind of inspiration for some of the stories. So I was thinking of a little girl, and I chose the name that is one of my favorite names. I really like the name Lily. So I'm going to type here, which if we were in school, I'm probably using an anchor chart. But I'm choosing the name Lily, and it's just a name that I really love. And I am thinking about basing my story on the woods. Where I grew up as a kid, we lived on a piece of land that was surrounded by hundreds of acres of just forest. It wasn't ours, but my brother and I used to spend a lot of our time just kind of roaming in the woods, exploring, climbing trees. And so I thought this might be a fun place to imagine for my character. Now, you might be thinking about your character and writing about school, kind of like Junie B. A lot of her stories take place at school. So you could be thinking of a character, and your place could be school. It could be maybe at a sporting event. Your place could also change. So maybe your character, one story idea takes place at a movie theater. Maybe one takes place at a restaurant. So don't get stuck on all of your stories having to be in the same spot. But my character, Lily, is going to have lots of stories that take place in the woods by her house. Now, my favorite step, like I told you, is imagining all the trouble that your character can get into. And if you were in the woods and exploring, what are some problems that you might have? What's some trouble that you could get into? Well, right away I was thinking, if she's climbing a tree, what do you think could happen? She'd fall out of the tree and get hurt. I know in the woods there are lots of animals, so maybe she encounters a scary animal like a snake, um, or a bear, and has to figure out what to do. That could be really scary. So I'm going to put snake or a bear. Now I don't want to put something like a dragon because we want to remember that this is realistic fiction. So everything that happens in our story would have to naturally happen wherever your story is taking place. What if she's out exploring and she gets lost? That could happen. So I have some ideas going here. I want you to pause my video and take some time to come up with a character that you might like to write about today. You can always change your mind if you think of something later on. And think about, where could your story take place? Is it happening at school? Is it happening, like I said, at your sporting event? Is it happening at church? Maybe it's happening at a friend's house, your neighborhood. And then think about some of the trouble that your character gets into. You could definitely kind of start a list of ideas like Mrs. Bird is doing, but you don't have to. You can be thinking in your mind. And when you have taken some time to think about your pretend character, then you can hit play and watch the rest of the video lesson, okay? Okay, now that we've taken some time to think of our ideas, now we are going to move to step 2, which, as you know, is the most important step because that is when we plan our story. We want to plan it like we have planned writing from the very first day of school. We're going to think of our ideas and touch and tell them across our fingers before we do a sketch and start writing. So I have decided that Lily is going to be exploring in the woods and get lost. And so I'm going to think about kind of the beginning, the middle, the end, and then some details that I can throw in to tell what is happening in order in my story. So I think we'll start off with one day, Lily was in her treehouse when she saw a really cute bunny hopping by, or a squirrel, or a bird. But let's just go with bunny for now. She decided to follow the bunny and see where it went. She followed the bunny for lots of minutes. I don't know, 20 minutes, 15 minutes, when she realized she was lost and she didn't know how to get home. So here I am at the middle of my story where I've told the trouble, the problem. Now I have to think about how she's going to solve that problem. The bunny can't tell her how to get home because then that's not realistic fiction because we know bunnies don't talk. So what would a real child do if they were lost and they needed help? Maybe she takes her cell phone and calls her mom and dad. And you know how you can use the GPS on your phone. So maybe that. So maybe then my fourth finger, she calls mom and dad and they use the GPS to find her and come get her. Yeah, that works for now. So she calls mom and dad, they find her, they come and get her, and then she ends up getting home safe. But she learns that she really shouldn't wander off alone in the woods. Wow, that's a good idea for a story, isn't it? I told what happened first, next, last, and then I threw in some details to make sense. I don't know if I'm quite ready to write yet, so I'm going to go through that process again in my head. So one day, Lily was hanging out in her treehouse when she saw a cute bunny walk by. She decided to follow the bunny to see where it went. She followed the bunny into the woods for about 15 minutes when she realized she was lost and she didn't know how to get home. She thought for a while and then remembered her cell phone. She pulled her cell phone out of her pocket, called mom and dad, and they used the GPS to come and find her. They brought her home safely, but she realized that it wasn't a very good idea to wander off alone in the woods, and she promised that she would never do that again. Awesome. Good job. Yay. I know if you were here, you'd clap for me. I think that's a really good idea for a story. And I still have lots of other ideas of other stories I could write about Lily. But I think this is a really good one. What do you think? Thumbs up? Good. So now that I have it, have the idea, I planned it, now I am ready for my favorite part, which is write. So if you were in school, you would just come get all of this paper. But I know you're at home and you may not have that paper. That's okay. You can print out a copy of the paper because I'm going to put a link in there. But you don't have to do that. Do you have a notebook paper, a notebook that has paper in it, or even recycled paper that you could maybe write on the back of? Get your hands on some paper and start writing. So your job is to think about what story you want to write first. And you're going to plan it and touch and tell and sketch and write. I have two, sorry, you can hear my phone. I have two kind of anchor charts. You might want to pick one and print it. Or you can just go back to the It's Learning page if you need to look at it again. That just reminds you the steps for writing a realistic fiction story. So I have this one. This might be one that I would have put up on our wall so that I could say, did you do this? Did you do this? But there's also this one that I showed you. So maybe you want to print that out and keep it in your folder wherever you're keeping your writing, so that if you forget what you're supposed to do next, you can look back at this. But you can also come back to Mrs. Bird's lesson anytime that you want. But big ideas. Before you can watch the next lesson, you need to spend some time, like right now, sitting down and writing a story or two about the character that you have imagined. I'm going to go ahead and write my story, and I'll put it up on It's Learning underneath this lesson so that if you want to look at it, you can. And then we'll come back maybe later this week and watch the next session, okay? Good job, guys. Good job, writers. So proud of you. Do your best work. Do work that you are proud of. And don't forget to plan before you write. All right. Love you so much. Bye.